we are going to get started. This is our summer form series. In case you missed the previous ones, you can catch them on the recorded version of them. We talked about the BRBC in June and then the attached forms to that BRBC, like the BFPI and the NBI, all those fun NBIPs, Notice of Broker Involved Properties. All those fun things. I'm getting yelled at to reshare my screen because I stopped sharing it. So those were all in June. We also last week covered all of the forms changes. So every June, they like to really mess us up and there we go. All right, and change up our forms. And they usually don't do it till the end of the month, but this year they did it early. So those all went into effect June 16th, I want to say, and we covered all those changes last week. So you can go back and watch that on repeat as well. Well, I'm just opening up all my windows again. We are now diving into closing out June and going into July. We're going to talk about buyer forms. Before we dive into that, though, I do have my screen shared. I've talked about Transact before. Transact is the free CRM, the free contact relationship manager that we have through our Zip Forms membership or our Lone Wolf. If you haven't tried it yet, I'm a fan. So if you're not paying for another CRM of some sort, I know there's a lot of people in our office that are using Follow Up Boss and some other platforms like that. We have the free OneSuite with through Realty One Group. I actually like Transact better than that one, and they're both free, so you could try them both out. But I like Transact mainly because it's just a little bit more user friendly. It's actually a lot more friendly, a lot more user friendly. I'll figure out my English in a minute. So I like it for that purpose because it has more features. It's easier to use. It's easier to send out emails. You can actually link it up to send out text messages as well. You can set up automations. It's really cool. And so normally when you open Zip Forms, it just goes straight into your Zip Forms library, but you can have it go into Transact instead. So if my screen looks different than what yours does, that's because I'm inside Transact. To toggle between them, up here in the top left-hand corner, I could have been in Zip Forms or in your Zip Forms. That's how you toggle into Transact. And there's several options in there: relationships, contacts, Authenticign, and Transact. They're all interrelated to each other. But right now, I'm in the Transact home screen. The reason I'm talking about this, I have a point here besides just telling you that I would recommend trying it. The other thing that's nice about this is that, which isn't my point either, just side note, is that it works seamlessly. So if you have all of your contacts inside of Transact and then you go to start a transaction, which is where this is, it'll actually link it to that contact in your CRM and link those transactions together. So it's just again a little bit more user friendly, and it works seamlessly to help keep you on track. So you have fewer places to log into. I'm a fan of that as well. And my point now is there's a little screen on my window right now that shows you that you can share transactions across your brokerage. I think this is the coolest thing yet. I haven't actually tried it. I just saw the pop-up this morning. There's a little video on watching more, but here's the cool thing about this. Especially if you're like in the mentor program and you're a mentee, you should be able to share your transactions with your mentor, which means that your mentor has access to that transaction file. Or let's say you're going on vacation and you're leaving your business in somebody else's hands while you're gone. You can share those transactions with the person that you're leaving your business in their hands while you're gone so that they have real-time access to your files. So I just think that's super cool, whether you're on a team, whether it's a mentor-mentee relationship, Whether, I don't know, I would think Melina personally, as our in-office transaction coordinator, would want to jump on this and encourage all the people that she does transaction coordination for to utilize it inside of transactions so that you can share those transactions, that you both have access to the same file to create documents and stuff. I just think this is super cool. So that's my opinion. You're welcome to use whatever you want to, but I just think it's cool. I'd look into it. So that is the new update there. Just thought I would share that before I got into today's training. Any questions before I jump in? All right. Fabulous. I was going to have this open and ready to go. And then I thought, well, maybe you guys would benefit from watching me open a transaction. So I'm inside Transact. I'm just going to come up here if I was starting a new purchase transaction and hit new transaction. Here you have the option of purchase, listing, lease listing, or lease. We don't mess with leases and lease listings very often. So most of ours are either going to be purchases or listings. We're covering buyer form. So I'm going to leave it selected on purchase. You can import the property details. Okay, so I could click on this. It's going to say, hey, where do you want to use this from? Oh, I hope that's my user ID. That's not my user ID and password. I have no idea. Oh, well, here. This I don't know the answer to. Anyways, you can come in here and pull the MLS number. So just know that you can do that. You should also, I think you can also import it later on. This works better with listing than it does purchase because obviously, no, it works better with purchase than it does a listing because there should be an MLS number associated with whatever the property is that you're making an offer on. You're going to plug in that MLS number. You're going to select import and it's going to pull all the details into your transaction. I'll figure that out. Maybe I'll demonstrate it next time. I don't know what my password is. It auto populates it. Who knows what it is? All right. And then if you have a template, you can import that template. So like I have a residential purchase template that I've set up. We'll probably go over that at some point during our forms training. I'll show you how to set up those templates. It pulls in documents already ready to go that I've set up. It also pulls in the parties. And because we're inside of Transact and not just zip forms, you also can set up to-do lists. So maybe for my buyer transactions, I've got a to-do list set up that helps keep me on track, make sure I mark all the boxes. You can set that up in here and it'll automatically pull that in as well. So just some cool things that you can do there. I'm going to go ahead and hit the next button to proceed forward. Here's where you would put in the property address. You can put in the listing information. We try to not get in trouble. This is part of the reason that we're moving over to Substack versus YouTube, because YouTube's constantly pulling my information down because it thinks I've got like real addresses and stuff in here, or I've given away too much information, which goes against their policy. So that's part of the reason we're moving over to Substack, is they don't control those type of things. So you're going to put in your address there. You can put in as much information as you want to or as little as you want to, just so you know. And then we're just going to go next. It's going to take us to the offer. And again, we could put something in here. We could just skip over to it. So we're just going to hit next. Here's where you can add in your buyers and sellers. So I could add, this is inside Transact. So it's going to pull from my CRM that's already in there. So it would pull that information over. So like if I typed in Jeremy, oh, I don't know that he's in there. Oh, there he is. So I could add him in that way, right? So somebody who's already in my CRM, it would pull them over. So, and then you could select the role. Let's see here. Buyer. And we would hit, here's his, it pulls in information to set you up successfully for signing as well. So like, here's how do we want his name to show up on the actual documents? Because we may have him in there like, this is actually my husband. We're going to just delete that real quick so that, all right. Boom. All right. So you can, maybe he goes by Jay. So in my CRM, he might be in as like Jay Petard, and then we need his legal name on the document. So this would give you that option to update that first name, last name to match how you want it in there, or and then preferred signature. So maybe it's a trust or something to that effect that they're doing the purchase, and you could put that in there. So just some little tips there. We're going to come back over here. We're going to hit add party. Now, if I need a new one, right? So maybe I want to add my first name for my buyer is buyer one and last name is one, right? So we would hit create new. And then we go buyer, first name is buyer, last name is one. We're going to hit save. So now I've got this buyer added in, and maybe I want a buyer two added in that's not already in my CRM. If you are just inside of Zip Forms, this process is a little simpler as far as creating it. You basically hit create new purchase, you put in the property address, and then you create the file basically. All right, we're gonna hit create transaction. All right, so here is that inside of Transact. It already added in those documents that were inside of my template. Today, we're really focusing mostly on the California Residential Purchase Agreement. I'm noticing too that it doesn't look like it updated this form. I'm gonna have to look for the new forms update because it shows here 1225, although it shows, yeah. So anyways, let's take a peek at that. All right. I just clicked on that form, which opens it up into the forms editor, just like it does inside a zip form. So from here on, like as far as editing and stuff, it works exactly the same as just opening zip forms versus going into Transact. We're just waiting for it to open. It's like the spinning wheel of death, except it's the lines of, it's like got lines going across the page instead. Just waiting patiently. And if it doesn't open very nicely, we're going to go back the other direction and go into zip forms. So I'm going to give it like 2 more seconds here to think about its life. There we go. All right. So here we have our California Residential Purchase Agreement. I'm just going to scroll down real quick to see what the date is on this form. No, it's not the new one. So it didn't update my templates with the new forms, which that irritates me just a little bit. We're not going to save changes. So hold on. Okay, I'm going to toggle back over to zip forms. I can go in there and delete it and re-add the forms, but I'm a little irritated. I'm going to see if the other side updated. So give me a minute.
Maybe I had a question on that in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, generally you don't have to update your templates. Usually they
It'll auto.
update on their own as long as it's a new transaction. So that one,
Oh, maybe that's why the one yesterday didn't, because it was an old transaction.
yeah, so if it's a file that's been open since before the forms release and you already had a purchase agreement, let's say added into that, it's not going to update the form inside of that created transaction. But going forward, if you create a new one, it should do the new form. So we're going to test that here. We're gonna go
And I
new form.
wasn't I wasn't on the forms training, but there's been revisions to the RPA, right?
There have been revisions to
So
the
what does that one look like in the forms library?
What do you mean? What does that look like inside of the?
Like if you go into the transaction and then you go, yeah, new purchase, um, on
All
the
right.
library side, it'll say like, you know, California Residential Purchase Agreement.
Yeah, so it is
Mhm.
gonna show that, but it's just gonna be dated. The date on it should be 6/26.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, we're gonna try this again because I've got a residential purchase template in here too. We'll see if the template's updated or not. Usually the forms and the templates get updated, but we shall find out. Mhm. Oh, yeah. So inside of my template in zip forms versus transact, Um, all of my forms have been updated. So if you notice here, like the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement at 6/26, notice of broker involved properties is 6/26. California residential purchase agreement is 6/26. So I'm going to open that one in the forms editor to cover today. So inside of zip forms, my template was updated. Inside of transact, it was not. So I'll probably submit a request, a help request on transact later after we're done with our training, just to make them aware of that so that they can update those templates because it should be updated. All right. It actually displays a little bit better in here for you guys as well because it's a little bigger. Um, So here is our residential purchase agreement. There's forms attached to the residential purchase agreement, just like they were attached to the BRBC. So there's more forms than just your purchase agreement in here. The first one is our disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship. Again, this isn't confirming agency relationship or anything. It's just letting whoever is signing this form know that there's different ways you can be represented in a transaction, either with a seller's agent, a buyer's agent, or an agent representing both the buyer and the seller. So that's the first form that you come across. It's the same as the one that we covered during the BRBC. Second one goes directly into our California residential purchase agreement. The rest of our bonus forms for this are at the end. So they used to be at the beginning and they switched them to the end. You want to make sure to put a date here in the date prepared line. And this date here, the upper left-hand corner date, anytime we have another form that references the purchase agreement, such as a repair request, an amendment to the existing agreement, an addendum, it all says purchase agreement dated. It's based on this date here, not the date that it was signed. Okay. Buyer's names go here. Okay. We're going to put in buyer's full legal names here. If you ever wonder what that is, check with the lender before you write the offer for their names, because really the lender is kind of in charge of how that's going to show up, because they're the one doing all of the more legal side of things with regards to the loan process. They've already run their credit and stuff, so they have their legal names. So I always like to either check their pre-approval letter or just double check with the lender, because sometimes the lender's going to want middle names in there, and sometimes they don't care, or they just want a middle initial. So always check with your lender. All right. Property to be acquired. You can pull this in from the MLS. So if we go listing information, we can go import here, import listing or import tax record. So you can do this from the beginning, or you can do it inside of the editor. So we could go import listing. See, it's got my stuff already saved here. Listing type is going to be residential. Make sure you have the listing type selected correctly when you go to pull over the listing ID, because um, it's going to make sure if we have like that's where it looks for the listing ID. So if we have like land listed here and then we put in the ID and it's not a land listing, it won't find it. I'm just looking for real quick. I'm going to pull up a MLS number so you can see how this works. Hold on, give me 2 seconds here. Where you go? Vacaville. And hold on, I've got all condos showing up. Oh, here's a. All right, here we go. So we're going to plug in MLS ID 326046369. We're going to click this box here for replace existing data with imported data and hit import. The reason that I do that is sometimes if I'm working with a buyer, we may have written an offer on another property already, and that property didn't get accepted. Now I'm coming back in to edit that purchase agreement. You can override the previous data that was already imported by checking that little box. So see, when we did that, it went ahead and put in the property address here. It pulled in the APN number for us, so we didn't have to type that in. I will say up here at the top where it says Carlsbad Circle, please make sure to always put the street suffix at the end instead of just 175 Carlsbad. We want to make sure we put circle or street or road because there might be a circle and a street and a court and who knows what else with the same numbers and street. So we always want to make sure to put the end on there. It also pulled in for us the listing agent's information, name, company, license numbers. Okay. It did not, I don't have it set up to automatically check those boxes. So I'm going to check the box for the seller. Your option here is the seller's brokerage either represents the seller or both the buyer and the seller. If we check this box here, notice it moved all of our boxes over to the same. There was a question here last week or the week before, I think it was last week, because what happens here is it says, hey, both the buyer and the seller dual agency is represented by the brokerage. And then they gave us a box for here. Checkbox, is this the seller's agent, salesperson, or broker associate, or both the buyer and seller's agent, dual agency? It automatically moves them both over. Technically, the brokerage is representing both, but it may not be the agent. So if you didn't check any boxes here, you could go in and fill those boxes in later so that it said both. We would check this box for both the buyer and seller dual agent, and then the agent themselves just representing the seller, right? And then that agent representing the buyer. You'd have to go in there and manually check those boxes when you send it out for signatures. But this one is different. So obviously different brokerages. So this one's representing the seller and the seller's agent. And this is the buyer and the buyer's agent. We also covered previously the additional broker acknowledgement, the ABA form. So see if we have more than one brokerage representing either the seller or the buyer, we would check this box here. And who is being represented by multiple brokerages. Okay, so I gave the example that maybe like it's a divorce and the husband wanted one brokerage and the wife wanted another brokerage. And we've decided to work together to get the property sold for them. That might be where you'd have like the ABA come into play. It doesn't come into play very often. Potentially competing buyers and sellers. It just mentions that in there. And then the terms of the purchase and the allocation of costs. So this next section is what we call the grid. And this is where all the details are worked out for the purchase of the property. Everything else in this agreement, once we get past the grid, is just all the information. It's the grid in section 4, which is the additional forms. Everything else is just more details on everything inside of that grid. Okay. So if we start back at the top of the grid, it starts with the most important part, the purchase price, and then if it's all cash, right? So we would put in our purchase price here. So maybe we're offering $490,000. And if we don't check this box, we're assuming that it's going to be financed, at least a portion of it. If we check this box here, we're saying, hey, it's an all cash offer. Okay. People often ask me if it's hard money, right? We've got a hard money loan that's pre-approved. Is that all cash or is that financed? Okay. Because we don't have to go through the normal underwriting process on the property. It's still financed because the buyer doesn't actually have a bank statement showing those funds available. So on a cash offer, we should be able to show a bank statement or an investment statement or something showing the funds available. Okay, that's the difference between all cash and not. So hard money is very similar to cash because it's usually pre-approved. The funds are ready to be transferred at any time, but it's actually coming from a lender. They usually issue a letter with that hard money as well. Close of escrow, we have the option here of either days after acceptance or on a specific date. Okay, so we could do 30 days after acceptance, or we could say, hey, we don't care about the acceptance date. We want to close on the 24th of July. Okay, so maybe we want it to close on a Friday versus a Monday. Maybe we've got a buyer who has to be out of their current apartment by a specific date. Maybe we want a longer escrow period, but we don't want it to be like 60 days after acceptance. Maybe we just we can't close until the 1st of August for whatever reason. So we're going to say the 3rd of August. Maybe they needed a pay stub from their new job before they could close, right? So whatever that is, we could do a specific day or we could do days on the specific date. Obviously, we're just aiming for that date. Doesn't matter when it's accepted, how long it takes us to negotiate terms on counter offers. On days after acceptance, it's going to be a revolving date, right? So if it takes us from now, which is June 25th, to maybe let's say Tuesday of next week to get this offer fully accepted by the time we finish negotiating terms and stuff, that's going to be the 30th of June. That 30th of June then would be day 0. And then it'd be 30 days after that. Okay. So that's how those dates work. Those are your two options there. The offer expiration, it defaults to 3 calendar days after all buyers' signatures. Or you can put in a specific day and time. So maybe you're like, hey, you've got until Saturday morning at 10 a.m. before the offer expires. Okay, so it defaults to 5 p.m. 3 days after your buyer's signatures, or you could put in a specific date and time. The offer being expired does not mean that the seller cannot still accept it. It also doesn't, but it doesn't force the buyer in the contract. So how this normally works is we draw up this offer, we submit the offer to the seller decides that, say we want to accept the offer, they sign that they accept the offer. My buyer's now legally in contract to purchase this property. Okay, because we wrote the offer, hadn't expired yet. Seller signs it, they return it back to us. We're legally in contract to buy the property. So if we wrote an offer with no contingencies, we would be obligated to purchase that property or face the repercussions that might come with that if we tried to cancel or decided we didn't want to purchase it. If the sellers return the offer to us on June 27th at 12 p.m. instead of 10 a.m., the offer has expired. And what that means is that, hey, buyers wrote the offer. Sellers say, yeah, we want to agree to the offer. Here is it back. And then the buyers have to actually say, yes, we do still want to move forward. They're not legally obligated to the contract after the expiration date. Okay. The initial deposit amount here, you're going to fill in a amount here. It will auto-populate for you the percentage of that. Okay. But you can't, I don't know why I feel like it should allow you to auto-populate, like put in the percentage and then it puts in the dollar amount. So we don't have to actually like do math, but it doesn't do that for us. The, initial deposit is going to be due. Here's the additional terms within 3 business days after acceptance by wire transfer. Okay. So if we don't change anything in this box right here after the deposit, our buyers have to have the deposit to title and escrow, which is where we send it in California, within 3 business days. So that's not weekends. This is the only place in the contract where it doesn't count weekends as days. So if we submitted this offer today, sellers accepted it, it's a Thursday, we would have Friday, Monday, by the end of the day, Tuesday to get that deposit into escrow. Okay, so it's business days. And then notice here that it says by wire transfer. They have to wire transfer it. If they go to title and escrow and they deliver a check, we now have to do an AEA, an amendment of the existing agreement, to update the method by which the buyers paid for their deposit because we agreed to do wire transfer. Okay. I like to check this box here and put buyer to choose method. So that buyer
I
can
know,
drop off a check. They can do wire transfer. Yes.
and I've had a couple of clients drop off a check, and I know it didn't do an ETA.
Or an AEA. Yes. So you should. And your either the other side or transaction coordinator should have caught that because it is wire transfer, which also means so like a lot of the title companies have the little apps that you can use to make the deposit. That's actually an e-check. So just a heads up on that. That's actually not wire transfer. That's an e-check as well. So I like to just check that box there and put buyer to choose method so that we're not locked into wire transfer. They can drop off a check. They can use the app. They can wire transfer the funds. It doesn't matter as long as they're there. You can also, this blank here is to change the business days. So we could change it to 1 business day. We could change it to 5 business days, right? This is an important conversation to have with your buyers because especially if you've got buyers, right? This is why we do the buyer financial information form with our buyers is maybe they're like, yeah, we have the funds, but in everything, including the deposits, is coming from our retirement account or that's going to be gift funds, right? How long is it going to take them to get those gift funds? And are the gift funds coming from the giftor? Probably what the lender is going to require in the case of gift funds is that the giftor gifts the funds to the buyer deposits the funds into their account, and then the buyer writes the check or whatever for the actual deposit. So if we're not getting those gift funds for the deposit until we've got an accepted contract, the bank may hold the funds when they deposit the check from the giftor for like 7 days. They might like partially release it and not release the whole thing for a period of time. So we need to accommodate for that in this to make sure that we know and can stay contractually valid. We can always do two, 3 if we get the acceptance and they're like, yeah, 3 days is fine. And then we find out, oh, well, the bank's held the giftor's funds, so we've got to wait until they're fully released. Then we can always do an extension of time for the initial deposit and explain to the listing agent, hey, we're not trying to pull a fast one on you. Like the bank literally held the funds and we're waiting for them to be released so that we can turn around and get those over to title. So we can have those conversations as well. So there's lots of options there, but the default is 3 days, which is fairly typical to leave it that way in Solano County.
Hey, Amy,
Yep.
I was wondering, so with the initial deposit amount, I'm sure this has something to do with how strong your offer to be. How much do you recommend to put in for the percentage?
Yeah, so at the initial deposit, how much we would recommend is depending on where the purchase is. So there's areas and things that are typical for each area. So like Solano County, it's generally considered 1% is a normal deposit. Whereas if you go to the Bay Area, your San Francisco's, your Oakland's, those, it's going to be closer to like 3%. They want the full 3% held in that initial deposit. So, and then obviously if we're going into like a multiple offer situation and we want to make our offer stronger, we can always go up. And I've written them with less too. So I've written them with like a $500 deposit or $1,000 deposit, especially on those entry level purchase prices where our buyers maybe are doing 100% financing or they have very little funds available. We might keep it lower.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You can also do an increased deposit. So D2 is an increased deposit. If we check that box, then we would include the attached IDA form, which is the increased deposit addendum, which then specifies what the increased deposit would be and when that deposit's going to be due. Why would we do an increased deposit? Maybe it's a situation where we're starting with 1%. Maybe it's a tenant occupied property that we weren't actually able to visually see. So maybe our initial deposit is going to be $1,000. And then we're going to specify an increased deposit of $3,900 once the buyer actually has the opportunity to physically see the property, right? So we could do something like that. Sometimes we do increased deposits once contingencies have been removed, once buyer's property enters into contract, right? So there's lots of ways that we can utilize that to increase the deposit, to use that as a negotiation term. Keep in mind that if our buyers have agreed and the sellers agree to the liquidated damage clause, it does not actually do anybody any good to increase the deposit over 3% because the liquidated damage limits what the buyer or what the seller can retain to either the deposit or 3%, whichever is more. So, or whichever is less. Deposit or 3%, whichever is less. So if our initial deposit was 5% and we've agreed to the liquidated damage, we're actually only doing a 3% deposit that the sellers could retain. So it makes no difference there. All right. The other thing that I didn't mention, I did mention it previously when we talked about the grid in the BRBC, but the way this grid is read is this is section 3. So this is 3A, 3B, 3C, 3D1, 3D2, right? The next line here, the second column, that's the paragraph. So if we were looking for more details on the purchase price, we would go to paragraph number 5, or we would go to 5B for cash. So if we scroll down to paragraph 5 of the RPA, here's where it talks about additional terms affecting the purchase price. Buyer represents that funds will be good when deposited with escrow holder. Deposit, initial deposit, retention of deposit. 5B was all cash offer. If an all cash offer is specified in paragraph 3A, no loan is needed to purchase the property. This agreement is not contingent on the buyer obtaining a loan. Buyer shall, within the time specified in paragraph 3H1, deliver written verification of funds sufficient for the purchase price and closing costs. Okay, and then we go into 5C, which is loans, 5D, which is balance of purchase price, and 5E, limits on credits to buyers. So that's where that's how that grid format works. So one is the reference, and these are all paragraph 3. Second is the paragraph. The next is the paragraph title or contract term. Then we have terms and conditions, and then we have additional terms. So notice not everything has additional terms, and we don't always pull those into effect. Like if it's not an all cash offer, there's no additional terms under the purchase price. We work those details out later on. All right, section E, E1 and E2 is the loan amount. Okay, this all has to do with the loan. This is where we put in what is the loan amount going to be. This is where you have to do a little bit of math. Okay, because usually the buyers tell us what their down payment is or what the LTV is, which is the loan to value ratio. So if they're like, oh, we usually have from the lender that either the buyer's putting 20% down or it's an 80% loan amount. Okay, to do that math, we would take the purchase price, which in this case is $490,000, and we would multiply it by the percentage of loan. So let's say that we know the buyer's putting 3.5% down. We could go 100 minus 3.5%, which is 96.5%. So you would take and open up the calculator, and we would go 490,000 times 96.5%, which is 472,850. Would be our loan amounts. Okay, you could also go just so you know, on your handy dandy calculator, you could go 490,000 minus 3.5%, and you'd get the same answer. So you can do it both ways. But what goes here is the loan amount. You can always check with the lender too and say, hey, lender, we're making an offer for 490,000. What's going to be our loan amount? Because sometimes our lenders are like, I don't know, they round weird. And so they might say this is the loan amount, or they might say it's 472,800. Who knows? So you can always check with your lender that way. It defaults to a fixed rate. If they're doing an adjustable rate loan, okay, we would go check this box here. Here is, we want to fill this in. This is a fixed rate. So right now it's red that we're doing a loan amount of 472,850, which is 96.5% of the purchase price, with a fixed rate not to exceed blank. Okay, we always want to fill something in here. Okay, so this is usually, again, conversation with the lender. We want to know, hey, what are we anticipating their interest rate being? And they might be like, oh, it's going to be 6.5. So usually what I do is I round up maybe like 0.25% or something to that effect. So instead of 6.5, I might go 6.75%. The reason this is important is if we have a loan contingency, and the interest rates, we submit this offer. It takes the sellers a while. We negotiate back and forth with our counter offers, and it's next Thursday or Friday before the offer is actually accepted. And let's say rates all of a sudden jump up to 7.5% when we go to lock this rate. The buyer still may qualify at 7.5%. So we couldn't cancel the loan based on the fact they no longer qualify, but maybe that makes the payment super uncomfortable for them. That puts it up higher than what they're comfortable with. Because we put 6.75 here on this interest rate, we can now cancel based on the loan contingency because the rate has increased above what the buyers would be comfortable with. So I always put something there. I usually don't put the exact interest rate for which the lender thinks that we're going to get when they lock the loan, because I want a little bit of wiggle room there, and it just looks better to a listing agent if they call to verify with the lender what the loan amount is and what the interest rate is. Then I like to bump it just a little bit. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but that it also gives my buyer an out in case things get really crazy. Okay. The next line usually gets left blank, but if the buyer is paying points to obtain the rate, so maybe they're like, hey, we can afford this house, but we have to buy the rate down just a little bit to get it to that 6.5%. Maybe we got to pay a point to do that. We might say, hey, we want it to be, the buyer is going to pay up to 1 point to obtain that rate. And if the buyer has to pay more than a point, right? If it pops into 1.25 to get the rate or 1.5, now we can also cancel that loan based on the loan contingency, based on the fact that they have to pay more points, because that's going to be money. Points are 1% of the loan amount. So for every point, it's 1%. Okay. Usually, we aren't paying points for the most part. Well, I mean, for a while we were. Most of the time, I think we're not now. So most of the time we just leave it blank that we're not going to. I don't think it actually lets you fill in 0. Oh, it does now. It didn't used to let you do that. So you could always put in 0 there. That would probably be my default, so that we have it on record that the buyer doesn't have to pay any points to get that percentage. Okay. And then down here is this Crystal, yes, absolutely. They can always decide to go with a rate higher than what we put here or pay points more than what we put here. This just gives us the ramifications for which the buyer is going to be approved for a loan, or they can cancel based on the loan contingency. So yes, absolutely. They can always decide to put more down. They can always decide to put less down, higher rate, pay points. Those items don't really matter as far as the buyer is concerned. This just gives us those guidelines as far as the loan contingency itself. Yep. All right. You are welcome. The next line down here, which I'm kind of surprised they didn't create like a separate box for this one, but it's not. It's just part of the original. So we have loan amount here, first interest rate points, all referenced here where we fill in those blanks. And then we have if it's FHA or VA, deliver list of lender required repairs, and that's 17 days after acceptance. So this is a whole separate line item than our contingencies. So just so you know, but it also does fall in line with our contingencies because if our, so what happens with FHA or VA loans, oftentimes is the appraiser goes through the property and appraises the property, and they're looking at separate, stricter guidelines on those FHA and VA loans to make sure that the property qualifies and that it doesn't have, one of the main things that you see on the FHA and VA is that there's chipped, if it's a house built before 1978 and there's chipped or peeling paint, they're going to go, oh my gosh, it could be lead-based paint. Lead-based paint. There could be lead-based paint, guys. So we can't close on this property until that paint has been peeled off and repainted. Okay. So they're going to require that to be painted over. That's one of the main things that we see. I've had VA lenders call like a lack of a stair rail on the stairs leading to the second story. I've had outlets that are missing covers get called. Fire doors that don't close appropriately between the garage and the house. Oh, the other one that we see, I've seen a lot is that for like VA is that where people have cut through the drywall in the garage on the wall that is the house wall, because that's part of the fire barrier is that drywall layer there. And then they'll call that there's the drywall's been breached and it needs to be resealed for the fire purposes. So I've seen those called. So there are FHA and VA required repairs that come up. Usually those are based on the appraisal, or because it's usually the appraiser that's walking through the property. And we're going to negotiate those on a repair request. So they really kind of fall within our investigation contingency or our appraisal contingency or potentially a loan contingency. So just know that if we put 17 here and then we shorten all of our other contingencies up to, 12 days, we can give that list of lender required repairs to our seller. But if we've already removed all of our contingencies, we're kind of out of luck. So just know that these do need to kind of fall in line with those contingency periods that we want to deliver this list and get that appraisal done before we remove all of the contingencies. So just throwing that out there. But the default here is 17 days. I usually leave that 17, even though I'm going to be conscious of it as we move through the escrow period. All right. Over here, conventional loan is the default. So loan amount, fill in this box, and then it goes conventional loan. If we want to go FHA, we need to check this box. It's going to include the FVAC form as well as the HID form. So that's the FHA VA appraisal form. I can't think of what it's called right now, but it's just confirming that as an FHA or a VA buyer, they have the right, if the property doesn't appraise, to cancel the contract. It supersedes the appraisal contingency, just so you know. And then the HID is for your protection, get a home inspection form. There is the HID form. If it's a VA, we're just going to include the FVAC loan, our FVAC document here. If we're doing seller financing, we would attach the SFA form, which is the seller financing addendum. Or if it's other, so maybe we're doing hard money or something to that effect, we would check that box there. Okay. So conventional, leave it. Everything else, we're going to check the box. All right. And then down here is additional financed amount. So what we see oftentimes is maybe we have a buyer with an FHA loan who's doing a down payment assistance program. That down payment assistance program is an additional financed amount. It's important that we fill that in because if they didn't qualify for the down payment assistance program, we want them to be able to cancel based on the loan contingency, based on the fact they don't qualify for that additional financing. So maybe the additional financing is 1% of the loan amount for 190, there we go, or of the purchase price. And that's going to be down payment assistance, or maybe it's closing cost assistance. Okay. And then is it fixed rate or adjustable? What's the rate on that going to be? Are they paying any points to obtain it? We want to fill in those line items here. Okay. And then it's going to default to conventional. Okay. So down payment assistance might be considered conventional. We could put down payment assistance program. So we could put like whatever the program is, down payment assistance. Okay, so that's detailed what we are. Sometimes we do seller financing as a second. We don't see that as frequently, but it is always an option that we could do a seller finance, especially maybe you've got a property, maybe it's like a VA purchase where the loan is assumable and the buyers want to assume the loan, but they don't have the money to make up the gap between the loan amount and the purchase price. Maybe we're asking the seller to finance that difference. Okay, or maybe on a lot purchase, we're asking for seller financing. It's not as frequently seen there in Solano County or even in California as a whole, as it is in some other states. We see it more often, especially like in Idaho, we see seller financing all the time. So we just want to make sure that if there is some sort of loan coming in that second position, that we fill out that information here if we're financing any amount outside of the purchase price. Yeah, Iris says she sees it on mobile homes. I would assume that you would see it more because it's harder to obtain financing. So for people to get those sold, they're willing to do financing on those mobile homes, seller financing. Okay. It's going to automatically calculate out here your balance of the down payment and the purchase price total. So it takes your purchase price. It's going to subtract your deposit amount. It's going to subtract your loan amount. It's going to subtract your second loan amount to come up with this balance of down payment. So this balance of down payment might not, probably should not match what you calculated as the buyer's down payment to be, right? Because if we had a purchase price of $490,000 and they're putting 3.5% down, that would be $17,150. So this trips people up all the time. We've got a purchase price up there. The down payment doesn't match. It's because we're subtracting out the good faith deposit. Okay, that's usually where we see it messed up because oftentimes we don't have an item here, but it's usually, how come this doesn't match what I think it should be? It's because they're taking out the deposit. Okay, the important thing is this purchase price down here matches the purchase price up there and the loan amount is accurate. Okay, any questions there on the first part of the grid, section 3A through F? All right. The next section here, we're going to get through H probably, and then I'm probably going to wrap up for the day just to be responsible with your guys' time. Then we'll pick up where we left off next week. I'm not in a hurry to get through this. I want to make sure we cover it so that you guys have a full understanding and know how to fill this form out appropriately. So let's talk about 3G1. That is seller credit to buyer, and this is for closing costs. Okay, so if we're asking for a credit from the seller for closing costs, we would check this box here and fill in this line item here. Okay, this is not to pay for the buyer's portion of the broker compensation. This is not for if we want a credit for replacing the carpet. Okay, this is just for buyer's closing costs. Now, technically, if the buyer's like, well, I don't have funds, seller's not willing to pay broker compensation, buyer's having to pay that, we could ask for the buyer's closing costs to be covered, and then the buyer's going to pay with the funds they had available for closing costs, the broker compensation, right? So it's all in semantics, really. Great. Other seller credits or payments here. So this does not include buyer broker compensation. We would fill this out here and put in a dollar amount and what it's for. Now, keep in mind that if we put $5,000 in here and we're going to put in here Roof repairs. I was right. All right. Right. What's going to happen when we submit this residential purchase agreement over to the lender? Once we get in the contract, is the lender is going to see roof repairs, and that's going to be like red flag, red flag. We can't move forward. The lender is now going to say, hey, we need a copy of the roof inspection. And if the roof inspection comes back with those repairs, then the lender is going to say, hey, we need those roof repairs to be completed, or we need the roof to be replaced prior to the close of escrow. Okay, so it's going to red flag it. So if we're going to put something else here specific, we need to have a conversation with our lender first to make sure it's not going to red flag. Okay, the option sometimes with roof repairs is maybe the inspection came back. We have an inspection, $5,000 covers those. We may need to say, hey, lender, we're going to ask the seller for $5,000 for the roof repairs because they don't want to do them before the close of escrow. But can we do an escrow holdback for that? So we could ask for a seller credit or payments. They could either prepay for the roof repairs. They could hold it in escrow until those roof repairs are done, but the lender has to be on board with that. Amanda's question here is, this is where we could also put buy downs. Absolutely. If we were asking for the seller to pay for the buyer's the buy down, we could ask for it here as well. That would also be considered a credit to the buyer, but if we wanted to line item it, we could absolutely put it here. Maybe we need 1% for a buy down. And I would specify here 1% for buy down, or for buyer's rate buy down. Or no, Iris. Iris's question is, if we didn't put it here for the roof repairs, could we do it on an addendum so that the lender will not flag it? Technically, anything would need to be turned, whether it's an addendum or an amendment. But the problem is, Iris, is even if we didn't share the amendment or the addendum with the lender, escrow is going to flag that on a credit at the close of escrow on the final settlement statement. The lender's going to flag it then because they're going to say, hey, wait, what's this other $5,000 credit we're getting? And the title and escrow is going to put on there for roof repairs or roof work or whatever, and the lender's going to flag it at some point. So anytime there's money involved, the lender needs to know about it. They need to be aware of it. We can't do it outside of escrow. That's loan fraud. So we can't be like, hey, we're doing it on an addendum, and the seller's going to just cut a check to the buyer outside of escrow for those repairs. Loan fraud. So don't do that either. It would, yeah, no, Amanda. Yeah. Yes. So if we wanted a credit for repairs, it would be better to include a repair request or just specify in the seller credit to buyer. Maybe we increase this to 15,000 instead of the 10 if we need closing costs and that. And we just let the listing agent know that, hey, my buyers need $10,000 in closing cost assistance in order to make this work. And they're also asking for a $5,000 credit towards the roof repairs. We're pre-negotiating that with the offer. So you could do it that way. You could do it as a repair request because we don't turn in our repair requests to our lenders ever. Do not give lenders repair requests. And what we do is if we negotiate a credit as part of a repair request, we do it on an AEA form. We list that credit as a credit to the buyer. So you could do it that way as well. But if we put in here new carpet, we put in roof repairs, we put anything in here, we just want to make sure the lender is aware of that and that that's okay with them, that we've written that in. The other thing to be aware of is that the lender credits are limited. So we can't get $50,000, or not lender credits, but the seller credits are limited. We can't do like $50,000 in credits towards buyer's closing costs. Our lenders usually limit those to, usually it's right around 3%. Sometimes they can get up to 6%, but it's actual closing costs. Okay, so keep that in mind. So we always want to, anytime we're negotiating credits for our buyers, we always want to have a conversation with the lender to find out what the max amount of credits is a buyer can get from the seller. Okay. Because what happens is if the max amount of credits our buyers can get from the sellers in this case is $10,000 and we've negotiated $15,000, the additional $5,000 is going to go back to the seller. Wah, wah, wah. And then they only agreed to 10, even though it says 15. So just keep that in mind. Now we can utilize those additional credits. Let's say we negotiated credits. Closing costs came in a little lower than we were anticipating. We negotiated 15,000. Our actual closing costs ended up only being, I don't know, 14,000. We could do some things to utilize the rest of that credit. Usually our lenders are pretty smart. They'll help us utilize the rest of the credit either by we can extend the home warranty for 3 years, eat up some of that additional credit so we can go from a 1-year home warranty to a 3-year home warranty. We can upgrade the home warranty to make it a better home warranty that costs more money, utilize some of those credits. The buyer can buy the rate down to utilize some of those additional credits. So there's some things that you can do to utilize them so they don't go back to the seller. Ideally, though, that's not going to always be in the buyer's best interest. So we want to try to negotiate credits to max that out. If maybe we're negotiating $20,000 in credits, we max out at $5,000 or $15,000. We can always then negotiate too. We'll talk about this more with the repair request. We can negotiate a price reduction as well. So as the contract continues on, but just keep in mind here that we always need to be in communication with our lenders to find out loan amounts, down payment amounts, financing, what type, what the interest rate's going to be, if there's any rates to buy down, what the max amount of credits is a buyer can receive. Okay. And then G3 is seller's payment to compensate buyer's broker. This is where we're asking on behalf of our buyer for the seller to pay the compensation or the fee for whatever you want to say, whether it's commission or compensation for the work that you're doing. Okay. You can put in here a percentage amount. Okay. This next line is final purchase price and dollar amount. So it would be purchase price and, or we check this box here for a flat amount. This amount should match or what's in your BRBC. It should not exceed what's in the BRBC. It may be less than what's in the BRBC. Okay, your buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. So the amount, whatever you put in here, cannot exceed what's in that BRBC, but it can be less or the same.
Amy, that would only apply if your BRBC is signed at a flat rate, correct?
No. We may have signed a percentage with our buyer for our BRBC, and maybe we know that the seller, maybe the seller's agent has told us that the seller is willing to pay up to X amount towards the compensation. So instead of putting in a percentage there, we put in that flat rate, which is maybe a little less than what we have on our BRBC based on percentage. It doesn't have to match as far as percentage versus flat rate, as long as the dollar amount itself doesn't exceed what's in that BRBC. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
A lot of math.
All right. H1 is our verification of all cash. This is if it's an all cash offer, it's going to default that the verification of cash is attached to the offer, or we can check the box that it will be turned into the seller blank number of days after acceptance. It defaults to 3 days after acceptance, but we could change that to 1 day. We could change that to 5 days. Maybe we're writing it's a hard money lender who's giving us the funds, and they'll deposit the funds in the buyer's account as soon as we have an accepted offer. So we may say, hey, 3 days after acceptance, we'll give you proof of our all cash. Okay. So that's one way to work those hard money loans. Otherwise, they should have cash available. We can show retirement account statements. We can show the other, like maybe they're selling a property that's going to be their all cash purchase. We would do an estimated settlement statement for the house they're closing, showing the funds to close escrow. So that would be how you'd work that all cash there is and it usually, the listing agent wants it. If we're writing a cash offer, they usually want it attached to the offer itself. If it's a financed offer, then it would be verification of down payment and closing costs here for 6A, or sorry, H2. Just so we know too, if we're making a cash offer at $490,000, the buyers are still going to have some closing costs associated with that. So the verification of all cash also needs to make sure that we include the closing costs as well. So it needs to be a little higher. The closing costs aren't going to be as high on an all cash offer as it is for a financed offer, but they will still have closing costs associated with that. So just know that needs to encompass that. On H2, our verification of down payment and closing costs, we need to, if we were putting 3.5% down, which was $17,150, we need to be able to show that plus probably another 2 to 3% of the purchase price in closing costs. So if we were doing a purchase at $490,000, we had 3.5% down, times 5%. So we probably need to show right around $25,000 in account to accommodate the down payment and closing costs, unless we're asking the buyers to cover a portion of those closing costs or receiving down payment assistance, then it would be less that. But just know that this isn't just down payment and closing costs. And again, it defaults to attach to offer, or we can check the box for after acceptance. And this is going to be, again, bank statement, retirement account statement, gift letter, whatever that would be, wherever those funds are coming from. We need the document showing that the buyers are going to have those funds available to them to complete the purchase. On things like bank account statements and retirement account statements, those type of accounts, we can just show, usually it's like the first page that shows the total funds in the account, and you can black out the account numbers themselves. We don't have to turn the account numbers over to sellers or listing agents. They just need to see an account with the buyer's name on it with the funds available. So keep that in mind. It needs to have their name and the where the funds are coming from, like the bank name or whatnot, and then the funds available. All right, so that's H2. H3 is the verification of a loan application. That's also going to be attached to the offer as the default, or we could change it here to after acceptance. For the most part, we should only be showing buyers that are pre-approved homes to purchase, so they should already have that lender letter ready to go. Now, buyers can change lenders, so they might be shopping rates or looking at maybe getting pre-approved with another lender. Or pre-qualified with another lender. We can submit the loan that they are already qualified for, and then they are welcome to change lenders at any time, as long as it doesn't slow the process down. So there we have verification loan application attached to the offer, and then we have 3 boxes over here we have to check: pre-qualification, pre-approval, and fully underwritten pre-approval. We talked about these with the BRBC because this option is on there on our BFPI. It may actually be on our BRBC as well. I don't remember exactly. But pre-qualified is buyer has talked to a lending institution. Buyer told them what their income was, what they thought their credit scores was, and how much money they have in the bank. And lender said, gosh, based on what you told us, you're pre-qualified. Okay. Please don't write offers for pre-qualified buyers. There are some banks that are really good at issuing pre-qualifications. One of those is like Navy Federal Credit Union used to do this all the time. I don't know if they still do, but they would write pre-qualification letters for buyers. Bank of America, also one, Amanda says, yes, they don't actually do that. So we want pre-approved buyers. A pre-approved buyer is a buyer where the lender has actually pulled their credit report. The buyer has actually submitted income and asset documentation to that bank. They've reviewed it. They're pretty certain this buyer can purchase a property based on the information they've verified. Fully underwritten pre-approval is one where they've actually taken that a step further. They've put in a dummy property on the application and submitted it for underwriting. So we know almost without a doubt that our buyer is going to be able to close on that purchase. Ideally, fully underwritten pre-approvals are the best. Pre-approval would come next. Pre-qualified, if I was a listing agent, I would never accept a pre-qualified buyer. Okay, because I've had them almost fall out because they don't actually, buyers are silly and they don't know all their details. Let's see here. Amanda says new build lenders too. Yes, they do pre-qualified, which we're not super worried about. And then Crystal says, what percentage do you suggest they show for closing costs to include in H2? Usually about 2%, Crystal. So usually down payment plus about 2%, or it could be 3%. It kind of depends on that purchase price. So in those upper purchase prices, the closing costs are usually like if it's over 600,000, it's usually closer to 2%. If we're in that like $400,000 to $600,000 range, it might be closer to 3%. You can always ask the lender what their anticipated closing costs are, but usually you can get away with down payment plus about 2% in that verification of down payment and closing costs. If you're in that like sub 400 purchase price, right? Your mobile homes, your sometimes your condos, the closing costs may be higher because some of our closing costs, we talked about this previously in our buyer forms, which were attached to the BRBC. The lower purchase price, some of our closing costs, like our title and escrow fees, some of those are fixed. You've got lender fees, you've got whatever. So sometimes in those lower purchase prices, the percentage for the closing costs ends up being higher, closer to like 5%. Okay. So I think I'm going to stop there for now. We're going to pick back up next week on the RPA section J because it's 10:12. I appreciate you guys. Any questions before we wrap up today? Alrighty, we will be back next week. Same time, same place. We'll pick up on the RPA section J and continue on through the contingencies and such. You are welcome, Christy. We'll see you next week. Have a fabulous weekend.